Welcome to Margin of Thought, where we make space for the questions that matter. I'm your host, Priten, and together we'll explore questions that help us preserve what matters while navigating what's coming. How do you teach responsibility if students do not care? Or maybe more precisely, what do teachers do when students understand the difference between learning and shortcutting, but choose the shortcut anyway? Today I'm joined by Lorin Koch, an educator whose perspective spans several parts of the education world at once. He came to teaching after first working in journalism, then built a career in high school classrooms. He now teaches across in-person, online, and college settings. We're also lucky to have him on our team at Pedagogy Futures. Today, we talk about what AI looks like in actual classrooms, how students blur the line between assistance and avoidance, why self-paced and online environments make accountability harder, and what happens when technology makes it easier to complete work without really doing it. Let's begin.
I graduated from college with a double major actually in religion and mass communications. I worked in journalism for a year and determined that was not where I wanted to spend my whole career. And I had a family friend who was an education professor and recommended that I look into education. And so I did. I went back to school for a master's in teaching and have been teaching high school ever since, mostly English, but in some other subject areas as well. I got a doctorate in education, graduated in 2022 with an online program, and have been trying to work for colleges and have successfully gotten some online college teaching jobs over the last couple summers. I've moved to the town where that college is located, and so likelihood of having some additional teaching through the college, both to pre-service teachers and current teachers in the master's programs, is very high. So I have a lot of classroom teaching experience. I've also taught online high school for a couple of years as well. So I have a variety of types of experience with teaching. I also have two kids who are going to be in 7th and 9th grade next year. So I see this from many different perspectives.
Yeah, I'll definitely want to hear more about how you're thinking about this as a parent as well. I would love to start with your experience as a student before we dive into your teaching and parenting perspectives. What is the earliest memory you have of having an education technology tool used by a teacher in a formal context, especially if there's one where you or the teacher had a strong reaction to it?
I remember people wheeling the VHS with the TV cart into the room to play videos, or even had film strips when I was in junior high, where it's one image at a time, but it had the audio played. I remember a classmate who got queasy during a sex ed lesson in junior high and tried to leave the room, but was feeling queasy and kind of slammed into the blackboard on the way out. That was kind of interesting, that visceral reaction. I also remember in elementary school when we had these Apple IIe's, we would go down to the media lab in the library and use these Apple IIe's on Oregon Trail and stuff like that. So that was quite the technology at the time, and was quite amazing. Just one other really quick story I could add. When I was in 9th grade, when I had keyboarding, that was in the era when Windows had just come out. So it was like I guess it was like Windows 3.1. It was before Windows 95. And so I had keyboarding half on typewriters and half on computers. All the students knew the computers way better than the teachers did. And so, we were getting on network stuff and manipulating people's accounts and stuff. That was the era.
When you think back to those experiences, there's some joy in your voice. Is that an accurate descriptor of how technology was experienced by you and your peers?
Definitely. Well, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but for me, I really had a lot of fun with computers, and I would spend hours on them just trying to, mess around and see what I could figure out in the programming realm, or just how to use it for ways that were different from what the teachers suggested. But I wasn't doing anything malicious, really, just kind of mischievous.
And when you now think about decisions you make in your classroom, do you think your students feel a similar way about your decisions that you did about your teacher's decisions?
I imagine probably to a certain extent. I think it's harder now because in those days I guess I would kind of like call it the Wild West, really, of computer technology. And now there's a lot more tools that have structured stuff a lot more, so people don't have to figure things out for themselves as much. I think probably a lot of kids do enjoy using tech, but not necessarily understanding the tech. It's more the social components and consuming entertainment content.
So you've obviously taught online classes and taught in online high school, which is obviously by nature of it very dependent on technology. I'd love to hear about your in-person classrooms first and just like how you incorporated the technology and how you think about it. Maybe we could talk about pre-AI stuff first, and then we could talk about how that's changed post-AI.
I've used Google Classroom for years, the Google Suite, a lot of creating documents of different types and then submitting them through that. It's really a useful tool as an English teacher to be able to have students turn in their essays and get feedback and leave suggestions and stuff like that. But student presentations that they'll put on there and then share and then present from the front of class, a lot of stuff like that. I've also taught computer applications classes from time to time, which of course are every component of that, trying to learn how to use it the most efficiently and for the most productivity. So teaching different apps. I like the applications much more than the programming side. I haven't really done much with that.
Very cool. And what do you think about the transition to AI technology? Does AI currently play a role in your classrooms?
It does. When the AI first started coming out, I guess I'd call myself an early adopter because I'd been following some AI researchers on Twitter before ChatGPT was publicly released. And so when it came out, I was on the forefront of that. And I was scared of introducing it to students because I didn't want to just give them the tools to completely cheat on everything. But there were some who already knew about it. And so we used it to generate content for the yearbook page and images. I brought some image generation into class and stuff like that. I've tried to structure it so that students realize that they need to do the thinking and the writing themselves, but it can be a great aid in brainstorming and organization and editing and stuff like that. I was able to do some presentations for other teachers about AI because a lot of people had heard about it and didn't really know what it was. And so different ideas for using it in class productively rather than just being scared of it.
I'd love to have you walk me through what does it look like to help your students navigate the difference between the cheating and the not doing the thinking and then using it for thinking? Like, what resources are you providing them? What do those conversations look like? What is pushback from the students when you're having those conversations?
Yeah, it is difficult because a lot of them are constantly looking for a shortcut. And I'm so thankful that I did all my degrees before this existed because I know the shortcut would be so tempting, especially on online school where you're just on the computer doing your assignment. You watch a video or, there's a presentation and then you're reading on the screen and then you're typing your answers into blanks like that. So the online school that I teach for has an online services agreement that students have to sign that says I will not use AI to do my work for me. And then there's even a video that kind of walks through what different ways in which the AI often gets things wrong. So even if you turn it in, you've saved so much time and then you get an F and you're like, what's going on? Why did I? And then you kind of walk it through there. And then there's also Zoom interaction between the teacher and the students. And in that, there are questions that students have to answer to explain how they're going to go through this without using AI. And of course, they can say as much as they want about how they would never, ever do that. And then they get into it. And sure enough, guess what? They used it. So it's definitely an educational process. I think that is a fine distinction between saying using it productively and using it to do your work for you. So it is important to educate and clarify, to maybe show examples of when it would be a good use and when it would be a cop out use or whatever.
When I put myself in the shoes of a current high schooler or college student and the amount of pressure that I was facing at that time to get things done and balance everything, it would have been tempting to use the AI tools in ways that probably would have co-opted my learning. Are students receptive to that idea? Because it feels like to me that a huge part of the way forward is going to be buy-in from the students into like, they're going to have to agree that they need to put the hard work in.
I think that's right. And I think they do, like conceptually, they understand what it means to have it do your work for you and that it is not beneficial to them. They understand that on a conceptual level. But when it comes time to actually do the work, maybe you got behind and you're trying to get caught up. It just seems like a way out of a negative situation. And so even if they understand that ethically presenting work that's not theirs is not the best choice, they may still choose to do that.
And how often is it that where it's like it's all or nothing? I'm curious about, is it that students are having trouble figuring out the difference between, oh, this is AI assisted versus AI generated versus my own work? Or is it largely you're seeing students using it as a quick out, and so it's not really even AI assisted, it really is just purely AI generated?
I think I've seen more of that where they're just trying to get the checkbox checked off and
Yeah.
they don't really care. And it's not that they're not trying to hide it. It's just that they don't care enough about completing it in the more substantive way. They just want to get it off their list.
to me is interesting when you think about like how much of the narrative right now is about like helping students figure out responsible ways of using AI. Like if they already know this is clearly an irresponsible way, I wonder how effective conversations about like responsible usage would actually be.
Yeah, that's a great point. To be come in and say, this is not a responsible use of AI. Yeah, I know. I made a bad decision.
That's super interesting. I'm curious to now hear a little bit more about your online classes because obviously assessments have become very difficult at all levels of education, especially when you think about outside of classes assessments. Online classes in particular have a different challenge of not even having the opportunity to assess anything in person. I'd love to hear how you're managing the asynchronous but also synchronous online class assessments.
So I had someone just give me a clarification of difference between asynchronous and self-paced. The high school classes I teach are really self-paced. They have a year to get through the semester, and most of them don't take that long, but some of them do. But there's no specific deadlines. It's just their own time frame. Whereas asynchronous would be like there are deadlines. It's just when you do it is up to you. So the high school class I teach do have proctored exams, meaning that they have to have an adult who's not their, relative to watch them there. And I've had students turn in basically completely ChatGPT generated exams that were supposedly proctored. So I know that kids are quick at figuring that out. In fact, I can even show you an example. Let me pop this up here really quick. This was shocking to me and yet not shocking at the same. But this is an English final. And the answer to question number 23 on the test included all of this text. So here are humanized and shortened answers for the questions you've shared so far. And then it has all of the answers 1 through 22 in there. So the student accidentally copied way more than he meant to. Yeah. So, reading the test, I was like, oh, this is ChatGPT for sure. And then when I got there, I was like, yeah, that confirms it. So I had a conversation with that student and he admitted to it. And I said, my first impulse was to fail you from the class. I'm choosing not to do that. I'm going to give you an F on the test. But what are you going to do about this? And he was contrite, to the point of saying, yeah, I did that. It was a bad choice. I also had students in the college classes turn in stuff that included ChatGPT said, with the text underneath there. It's there. And it, I don't know how to keep that from happening in an online class. As much as you get their agreement that they're not going to do it, it's as good as their word.
Obviously, right now we're in a transition point for a lot of these things because everybody kind of like jointly is figuring out exactly what we're going to do about this. When I'm like sitting down and thinking about new releases that are coming out from the major AI companies, there's a new one that like makes the agent operator much more accessible through OpenAI, where you can kind of like have it navigate websites for you and do things on there. I fed in one of the products that we built that's in like a asynchronous tool that teachers will use. I tried to get it to do it, and it was fairly successful at going in and going lesson by lesson and taking the multiple choice questions, taking the end quizzes. And it's scary. That worries me in terms of the students who are going to be the hardest to reach and getting them to, to understand the importance of the actual work. And because I feel like the high achieving students will always kind of be able to like piece together the consequences of, okay, if I don't really do this, maybe I won't do well on the test, or I won't like do well, in college or in my career. I think there is some more long-term consequence calculation by those students. I think it's our students who are struggling the most that are probably like, only able to see what needs to happen within the next 24 hours, maybe in that moment, because they're thinking about so much else that I think are going to struggle. And the narrative around it for so many years has been that it's supposed to solve this divide and kind of help narrow the achievement gap and to provide resources and make things more accessible and scalable. Every night, it feels like it becomes less and less true, especially when you think about online high schools. A huge part of their existence is about accessibility. When you think about the future of that type of education for these students, how are you processing that and conceptualizing it?
It's hard because it would be one thing if the student passed this class with a D. It would be an indicator to any future school or any scholarship program that the student didn't actually succeed at a high level. The ones that really concern me are if the student is just good enough to get passed, so they have a B or B plus or something like that. And so that's kind of a bad signal that's the biggest negative, one way or the other, whether they get a grade that they don't deserve, um, or the teacher assumes that they use AI and so knocks them down and they didn't actually use AI just because of the phrasing that they used or something like that. The mismatches between intent, production and outcome are the biggest concerns to me.
One of the other things that I noticed, like a lot of folks talk about is how much of this is like your gut telling you that this is AI generated, right? I think there's obviously a massive debate about the use of AI detectors, just given how the rate of false positives and negatives are. But it does seem like the teacher's gut is still like a much better detector, in fact, than I think anything else. Um, but I don't know how, right? Like, how long is that going to last? I also like think about like students who've grown up, like, right? Like, if you're a ninth grader in 2023 and you've been using AI, even like in your personal life or whatever, the way you use language is going to be influenced by that, right? I'm sure like I picked up phrases and words and like grammatical structures from just how much I've read AI text, right? There's just no way my brain has not internalized some of that. And I've had time to like develop my writing style before AI. So I'm curious about what happens when like we are looking for these AI markers of text and you get a student who's learned how to rate while reading AI. What is that going to mean for our gut, right? Like that scares me a little bit.
Yeah, everybody who has their editing done by Grammarly or whatever in the sense of including Tapestry and Delve, and it's not just this, it's this.
Yeah, right. Right. But you read that enough and like, Adele becomes a normal part of your vocabulary. Like you're using it out loud. You write what you read is like a fairly accurate maxim. I'll have my students do online presentations now is like, that's like my like full final assessments are like a presentation style. And you can do it alone with me if you're like not comfortable doing it in front of the class, but you have to present something at some point where you're explaining your work and not just submitting it. Even then, like I get students who have like fully AI generated their PowerPoint text. Oftentimes it's way more words than the student would normally have written for anything. And there are times when they're up there and I'm asking follow-up questions and they're able to actually answer the follow-up question. And then there's times where they're just like, we'll reread what was on one of their slides. There's still some intuitive things that I can pick up as an instructor that will help me like understand whether or not the student has used AI. But again, like I don't know, like what do I do with that student who generated the text using, AI, it's very clearly AI generated, but did kind of learn, right? Like enough to defend what the AI said. That's interesting in terms of like how we just structure grading, right? So when you think about your assignments in your classes, even like the formative exercises, do you use discussion boards still?
So yes, I still think there's benefit in having to publicly state things, even if the students aren't at that at the same time, even if somebody comes to it later and looks at it, just having to publicly say something that has your name posted with is a good signpost that you're putting effort into it, hopefully making something that sounds relatively coherent for students taking at the same time. Discussion boards are a really good way to make sure that they're communicating. And probably everyone says more using a discussion board than they would in a real time class in person. I tended to sit in the back and not really say a whole lot, even though I was listening. But if you're forced to do a discussion board, it makes you put your thoughts into words. So I still think there's value there. In fact, I also think I've thought about incorporating ChatGPT conversations as a tech aided discussion board, because when you're doing a discussion board, you're supposed to post on Wednesday and then you're supposed to reply to your classmates by Sunday or whatever the dates are. By the time you get back to that, are you still remembering everything that you said in the first place? But if you have that conversation with ChatGPT, then it's the real time feedback and you can ask it to push back or add perspectives that you hadn't thought of and stuff like that. I think it can even be valuable that way.
The idea of not fully replacing, but at least replacing some component with a AI conversation would, especially for a self-paced class, I'm sure that would be a very different experience for the students. Well, I'm curious about how you're thinking about this as a parent, because those are two, I mean, obviously they're young. Those are formative years. I mean, major transitions are happening. What does technology look like in your home? What's available to them? What are they allowed to do or not do?
Yeah, my kids each have a device. My older daughter has a cell phone, and my younger daughter has access to one of my old phones for a shorter period of time in the day, but they'll use docs and share docs between the two of them. I don't think they typically have AI, not ChatGPT or anything like that, but now even the Google search has the AI stuff that you can just go in and communicate with. But they've seen me using it for years because I've shown them stuff that I've been doing and stuff for pedagogy. And so they've seen a lot of it and they find it interesting and funny when I come up with some crazy stuff. I don't think that they would know to use it on an assignment. I think both of them are a little bit more conscientious than that. But I could definitely see, especially my younger daughter asking, can we use this to get me unstuck? Or I don't know where to start with this. But yeah, they know what AI is and they know how ChatGPT works and they know how the image generators work and all that. So it's kind of an interesting uh, glimpse into students' lives. I don't really have experience with students. I don't have anyone in my household that's used it to cheat that I know of. Like I get that perspective.
Do you think that's their natural inclinations? Have you had conversations with them about it, or you know their natural inclination enough to not need to have that conversation? I guess.
I like to think I would know if they were using it in that way. When I see their assignments, it's pretty clear that it's their own writing.
Are you worried about like peer pressure? One of the things that especially from college students here is that there's a sense of feeling like you're doing a disservice to yourself by not using the tools, even if you're not particularly feeling inclined to do so. Because that's the competitive nature of, especially if like if you're in the sciences and it's graded on a curve or in those contexts. I mean, the peer who uses it and is doing it in a fraction of the time and then spending their rest of the time doing something else obviously has an advantage. I'm curious, like at that age level, it's not, I'm sure they're not the only ones who are still being very conscientious and haven't yet fully explored or even thought about like the misuse of it. I wonder as they progress through schooling if that's going to still be the case.
Yeah, I'm curious too. My older child is very much a self-motivated person, and so she's not the one out studying with friends or anything like that. And so she just kind of takes care of business. The younger one is much more social, and I could see it being more of a thing in her life to see what other people are doing and be affected by that. But she's also got a very strong sense of right and wrong that can be tempered sometimes by seeing what other people are doing and justifying whatever it is. I think she would talk about it though, because she talks about everything. She's an out loud processor. So I think she would talk about it. Such and such a person was doing such and such a thing, which would be a good opportunity for a conversation. But it will be interesting to see as they get older how much that comes into their experience.
What do you think about technology in general in their lives? Are you seeing it as a net positive? What are your concerns? Obviously, there's so much coming out about children and device usage and technology in general. It seems like the last few years it's been hyperfixated on the negative. How are you seeing your daughter's experience? How does that shape your understanding of that?
I do think of it as a net positive in general, just because of the opportunities to make tasks so much more efficient and productive. And both of my kids really like computers and tend to want to use them. We've kind of set some limits, some strict limits on desktop computer usage and then device usage as well, time usage, and then also social media, which we haven't really allowed them to get on social media particularly. That's kind of been, I wouldn't say research aided decision, but at least, to the degree that articles have talked about making wise decisions for kids when they're of certain ages. I do see that a lot of times when they get on my computer, what they want to do is just watch videos. And I think there's a good outlet for that, because you do need to unwind sometimes and just veg out and watch videos. If I could enforce time limits for myself like I can for them, that would be great for me. Uh, but but they do like using it productively too, as much as they enjoy doing it just for fun. They like to be able to know how to use technology. And my older daughter has always been really quick to understand technology. So she'll get in there and do something quick, and be done with it, some task or whatever it is. I think about the 10,000 hours that has always been talked about for expert level, and I'm probably not giving them enough time to do that. And so maybe I feel a little bit neglectful in that way because maybe they could become an expert at some technology if they had more time with it. But then I'm like, but at what cost? How much of your humanity are you giving up by spending so much time staring at a screen?
Right. That seems like the question of the hour across just how we deal with education, but just children in general is there's clear benefits to using the technology. There's productivity gains, there's learning gains. there's career opportunities that open up from it, and that's more and more so the case. But yeah, like what does that mean for their, social emotional development? What does that mean for their ability to, think on their own, to speak to another human, like all those things? It is a pretty fine balance. I just want to hear a little bit about like concerns from pre-service teachers that you're working with. I feel like again, like there's so much negativity around AI, especially in like the humanities, because of like how much assessments have been pushed back on or become irrelevant. Are you hearing concerns like that from your pre-service teachers about what it means for them when they enter classrooms?
I don't think that I've gotten to a point in either of the classes that I'm working with where that would come up as a topic of conversation, but I'm sure it will. One of them is a tech class, so I'm sure it will come up. They have talked about their experiences with tech and getting involved. But of course, even the students who are sophomores now spent very little of their time in high school with the AI existing. I am interested in that, though. I had one student post, she thinks the use of AI is unethical. And I asked for clarification on that, and she didn't really follow up. But I was curious to know what she meant by that, whether it was exploiting people's work or if it's just trying to pass off your work as something that as your work, or maybe even resource use of AI. I'm really not sure what her angle was on that, but enough to know that some students are really in tune with it and some just aren't that comfortable with technology. So I definitely am interested in that topic, though, finding out what the current college students they think about it.
I guess the seniors this year still got at least a year of college without at least the popularization with technology. And everybody else, I guess, got years of high school in without it. I'm curious, again, like curious to see how that evolves as more and more students have spent more their formative years with the technology around and on Google and they make a Google search or on their Snapchats and, Facebooks and Instagrams and WhatsApps and Apple devices, right? Like it's just like everywhere. If we were to end on your biggest fear and your biggest hope, or what excites you the most about how the technology is evolving, what would that be? We'll start with the fear so we can end on a good note.
Thanks. So one of my massive fears is students plug something into Google and then they get an answer that's AI and it's totally wrong. And they take it as fact because it was search result. And we're used to those first couple of results, even if they're promotional or whatever, it's not incorrect information, but ChatGPT doesn't know what correct is and what incorrect is. And so, three people could do the same search and come back totally convinced and completely different facts. Moving forward with that, they all have a different basic understanding of what reality is. And it's been shaped by unintentional AI. It's not malicious, it's just what it is. I don't think I would be as concerned as some people in the news about it taking over the world. It seems like it has its limitations. But I am really concerned about people getting material they think is factual and it being completely off. I think my biggest hope is, and this is something someone posted probably a couple of years ago, and this was fairly early on, and they said something like, I don't want AI to take care of my creative functions. I want AI to take care of my mundane logistical functions so I have more time to be creative. And I think that's the big hope for me to look at it is to say, can it help me take care of the paperwork, the stuff that's annoying to have to do, so that I don't have to worry about that as much and I can focus on things that are more meaningful and more human uplifting. That's my biggest hope for it.
Yeah, I think the person mentioned like laundry and washing dishes as two of the things that they didn't want to do, and like poetry and drawing as the things that they were hoping. Yeah, I was not like that was not the first interventions that they made. That feels accurate. And then there's parallels for obviously just like work related stuff too, but like schedule management is one thing that technology has made that so much easier. Like the amount of back and forth that normally it takes if you're trying to manage a schedule is insane. And sometimes you needed an entire person whose entire job was to manage somebody's schedule. And now there's all these tools available. And then there's AI tools that like use motion and stuff like that coming out that try to put your meetings in a particular chunk of time and help you, whatever. So like offloading that to AI technology, that sounds great. It's nice to hear from you because you obviously have three very different, distinct populations that you work with. I appreciate you taking time to do this. Lorin makes clear that AI has not created the responsibility problem in education, but it has exposed it more sharply. His reflections on motivation, integrity, and student disengagement pushes us to ask what schools can do when students understand the difference between learning and shortcutting, but do not always choose the harder path. Keep listening this season as we continue to explore the hard questions about technology, teaching, and what we want education to become. And pre-order my book for more on how to approach ethical concerns in education at ethicaledtech.org. Thanks for listening to Margin of Thought. If this episode gave you something to think about, subscribe, rate, and review us. Also, share it with someone who might be asking similar questions. You can find the show notes, transcripts, and my newsletter at preten.org. Until next time, keep making space for the questions that matter.